From WNIN News, this is the Friday Wrap. I'm John Gibson. On today's show, we welcome Sarah Lesh of the Evansville Courier and Press to discuss the upcoming vote on CenterPoint Energy's proposed electric rate increase. WNIN's Tim Jagalow will be along to talk about the latest phone scams that the Vanderburgh County Sheriff's Office is seeing. Our Kenton McDonald conducts an exit interview with retiring NPR anchor Renee Montaigne. Jevin Redmond will be along for the sports chat, and the Arts Council's Caitlin Bentley will join us for the Weekend Notebook. The Friday Wrap is next on WNIN FM with support from Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations following the news from NPR. It's the Friday Wrap on WNIN FM. I'm John Gibson. Thanks for joining us on this Friday. Well, the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission is expected to vote Monday on CenterPoint Energy's proposed electric rate increase for its customers in southern Indiana. Joining me now is Sarah Lesh of the Evansville Courier and Press. She's been tracking the progress of this controversial rate case. As always, Sarah, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Good to have you here. Well, let's go back to the basics, I suppose. What is CenterPoint proposing?
So CenterPoint, a little over a year ago, filed a request to raise their base rates. So that's pretty much exactly what it sounds like, the base rate of what you pay, nothing to do with those tariffs or trackers or any of those little things that come on top of your bill and make it rise even more. But your base rate, they were looking initially for about a $50 a month increase for residential customers, which is a significant increase. Sure. Many customers would argue any number would be a significant increase at this point. But they have since sort of whittled that down a little bit. The idea Monday is that we're probably not going to be looking at what they originally proposed. But there have been a couple iterations that have come since that 14 months ago, whenever it was first entered. So,
now, as I understand it, at least under the current proposal, that would be more like $35 increase per month for an average residential bill?
Right. So that is based off of a settlement agreement that came in this case. It was with CenterPoint and its industrial customers. It was not agreed to by any of the consumer advocates or the city of Evansville, which did intervene officially with legal action in the case. So that $35 has been on the table for a little while. So if maybe that could be the number where they land. We won't know, obviously, until tomorrow afternoon or Monday afternoon. Today's Friday.
Yes, indeed.
Until Monday afternoon. But we, could be looking at something between 35 and 50, something below 35. We just really won't know until they tell us.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned that agreement, which would bring it down to about $35 increase. So essentially, are we talking about some industries who are going to pick up more of the tab? Is that the idea?
That wasn't necessarily the idea as far as their agreement in the settlement. The agreement in the settlement was just with those industrial partners who are usually more on the side of advancing whatever proposal CenterPoint has on the table. And so those are ones that probably already are paying, a high amount anyway as an industry, but they were just kind of on board with moving the case along and agreeing to that settlement, whereas consumer advocates in the city still thought that $35 was way too much for a residential customer.
Yeah. Now, what action did the city council take? You mentioned some legal action, right, which sort of prolonged the process. Is that right?
The city didn't have anything to do with the prolonging of the process, but they decided to intervene officially, which in a rate case or any type of case in front of the IURC, individuals, organizations can intervene, which means they are an official party to the case. So they can be present during hearings, they can get all the official communication. So this was something that the City Council voted to hire a firm, an attorney's firm, to handle this for them, and they intervened officially in the case. And a little while after the settlement was proposed, if I have my timeline correct there, the City Council did officially remove itself from the action. Really the reasoning being that it was kind of dragging along, costing taxpayer money, of course, to hire that firm to represent them, and they weren't seeing, any major movement that they felt they could impact at that point.
And in the end, that $35 idea was still too much?
Still too much for City Council, for the city, representing its constituents and ratepayers. We also, although they didn't take any official action to intervene, County Council, County Commissioners, also in neighboring counties as well, in Warwick and Gibson, all filed testimony essentially in the case that any increase of that nature, which was at the beginning, so that $50 number was going to be way too much for their constituents to have to pay.
Yeah, so several counties weighed in.
Yes, they did.
This is the Friday Wrap on WNIN FM. I'm John Gibson, and we're speaking with Sarah Lesh of the Evansville Courier and Press. You can see her stories at courierpress.com. And we're talking about the proposal for an electric rate increase coming to CenterPoint customers. That decision is expected on Monday in Indianapolis in front of the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission. Now, we talked again, this has been about a 14-month process, right? So is Monday essentially the last day that the IURC can decide this rate request?
Sure. So the IURC has extended what the original deadline was going to be. We were going to have a answer in 2024. But the IURC extended it 126-day extension. February 3rd, which is Monday, is the last day of that extension.
I see.
It is on the agenda with a final order notice next to the Southern Indiana Utility Gas Company. And so they have the expectation that, yes, this will be the final decision, and it is the last day of the extension that they gave themselves and CenterPoint and the other interveners.
Yeah. Well, now, for several years, we've all reported on it that CenterPoint customers were paying the highest electric bills in the state, a list that I'm guessing no one really wants to top. But I understand we're not quite at the top anymore. Is that correct?
Right. We're second. We're pretty close still to being first, but despite that, I don't think any customer would say that jump from first to second has made any sort of impact on them. So I think that with this increase, we could potentially see another flip-flop among that first and second spot, of course.
Right.
And all utility companies are raising rates quite often. Duke Energy got an approval to raise rates just earlier this week.
That's true.
So we're kind of seeing those fluctuating. Like you said, nobody necessarily wants the top spot, I would imagine, as a company, but they are filing for increases. So
yes, indeed. I believe as of the last survey by the IURC, the group known as NIPSCO up in northern Indiana currently has the highest rates in the state, with our rates second on that list. Now, obviously, there's been lots of opposition to the rate hike. You touched on that earlier. Remind us about a public hearing that was held almost exactly a year ago at Old National Events Plaza.
So last February, a public hearing was held, which is required by law under the IURC to have those public hearings. They were held locally so that more residents could make their voices heard. This was an in-person hearing for the public to attend.
Right.
And then there was also written testimony that was taken that was filed with the record as well. So the rooms were packed. This was like nothing I've ever seen from covering rate hearings, and I've covered a few now. And we also heard from consumer advocates like the Citizens Action Coalition, who is at every hearing everywhere, basically, that it was certainly the largest that they have seen in recent history. 78 people spoke on the record, which is also a huge number for actually going up and giving testimony in front of these huge crowds.
Still just a fraction of the huge crowd.
Oh, yes, a fraction of who actually attended. But there, 76 of those 78 were considered to be against the increase, and then 2 were considered neutral, but no one was there who spoke in favor of it. So it was extremely clear from that hearing what actual residents and ratepayers' feelings are about an increase. There were some pretty heart-wrenching stories in terms of the hard decisions people are making every month between putting a little more toward food or having to pay more for a utility bill, or even with medications that their children or they need for themselves, sort of having to put different piles together to figure out how to pay that utility bill. So that's something that the IURC heard in person as well as read hundreds of letters, and all of that will be something that ratepayers hope they consider in their decision. Yeah,
and the decision that comes Monday. Now, I understand the Courier Press has reached out to Governor Braun about the IURC, this commission that will be making that decision. Have you heard back yet from Governor Braun?
Sure. So my coworker, John Webb, reached out to Governor Braun through his spokesperson, and we have not heard anything back. We heard back initially from the spokesperson that he would take it to Braun and, maybe get back. And we haven't heard anything. So
now, I guess the thing is, as we were talking before we went on the air, this current commission, the IURC, all those current commissioners, their terms are going to be expiring during Governor Braun's term, right?
Yes. So there's 5 commissioners. Their terms will expire while Braun is governor, and they are appointed by the governor, which means he has quite a bit of power when it comes to the makeup of that board, or I guess all the power. And so there were questions from the Courier sent to him essentially on maybe what his plans for that look like. So we don't have any idea, with no response at this point, but it's something that we'll keep watching. Obviously, all of the members have a decision-making ability within that board. Therefore, whoever he appoints is someone that individual residents have an interest in seeing who will end up there.
Sure. See if anyone from this area, for example.
Yeah, that's something. We had a local individual go up and actually try to apply and go through that process, and I think obviously they did not get selected for that board, but it is something where there isn't really any representation from this area of the state on that committee at this point.
I see. Well, as we mentioned, the Monday meeting in Indianapolis should be making this decision. And we've also mentioned, yes, it's been a 14-month process.
Right.
But you're expecting sort of a quick decision on Monday?
Yeah, so as far as for something where they're doing the final order, there won't be, testimony or things like that. The public isn't going to be speaking or anything. So if residents want to tune in and kind of hear what that decision is, you'll be able to do that on the hearing on Monday's agenda for the IURC board meeting, but it will be something where maybe having to wait until that full document comes out of what the final order is to get specific details. But you'll get a yes or a no, up and down vote if you do tune in and watch. Yeah.
And you should be able to see it on the IURC's YouTube page.
Yes.
That meeting begins at noon Central Time, Evansville time, on Monday, in which the commission should make their recommendation regarding that Center Point proposal. Well, Sarah, anything else to add that we haven't touched on here?
I don't think so at this point. Obviously, we'll have the decision Monday, and maybe we can chat about it some more next Friday if that
Yes, indeed.
if it ends up being something like you mentioned before we came on air. It's every resident that's impacted by this, so
Yes, indeed.
happy to help explain it as best we can for people.
We certainly appreciate that. That is Sarah Lesh of the Evansville Courier and Press. You can see her coverage of this story and many others at courierpress.com. As always, Sarah, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
All right, we appreciate the time. Well, coming up on the Friday Wrap here on WNIN, WNIN's Tim Jagalow will join us. He's got a story regarding quite a few scams being reported by the Vanderburgh County Sheriff's Office. We'll talk about that and how you can avoid those potential scams. That's coming up on the Friday Wrap on WNIN FM. Hope you can stay with us.
Our statewide news team wants to hear from you. Stay in touch by joining the Indiana Two-Way. You'll receive a text to your phone every Thursday morning with questions related to statewide topics and news updates to keep you informed. Your responses will guide our future reporting and make sure we are covering the stories that matter to you. To join, go to ipbs.org/text.
On All Things Considered, the world is brought to your car radio, smart speaker, and mobile phone. Hi, I'm Kenton McDonald, your local All Things Considered host on 88.3 WNIN. As we spend our afternoons together, enjoy local news, statewide news from Indiana Public Broadcasting, and national and international news from NPR. Join me Monday through Friday, 3 to 7, and thanks for your support.
This week on This American Life.
So he's moving now, the guy in the white car's moving, Bob's moving, you'll all be able to put your cars right down there.
On a narrow street in Brooklyn, one neighbor takes it on himself to get everybody to move their cars 2 times a week when the street cleaner comes through. He does this week in, week out. We hear about that and about other people who choose to live in their own ever-repeating Groundhog Days. For Groundhog Day, this week.
WNIN's listeners could be your best customers. We all find value in public radio, and research shows that 85% of listeners are more likely to take advantage of a business or service they've heard about on public radio. So if you enjoy listening to WNIN, why not invite your fellow listeners to become your customers? Call 812-423-2973 for more information.
It's the Friday Wrap on WNIN FM. I'm John Gibson. Thank you for joining us on this Friday. Well, fraudulent phone calls can cost victims thousands of dollars. The Vanderburgh County Sheriff's Office sometimes sees hundreds each month, and they say they're becoming more elaborate. WNIN's Tim Jagalow spoke with Sheriff Noah Robinson about the problem.
You could almost just like play that game where you spin the dice and come up with a scenario. Okay, this week it's a police officer, and it's about jury duty, and they want money cards. And roll the dice again. This time it's a sheriff's deputy, and they're in jail, and they want bond money, and they want you to use Apple iTunes. It's just insert the variables here.
But these calls always boil down to one thing. A loved one is in need of cash, and you are the only one that can help them. Sheriff Noah Robinson says these calls come in waves. While dozens are reported, there are likely many, many more. He said the most recent scam he can remember is the jury duty scam.
A sheriff deputy being impersonated, saying you missed jury duty and that you had a warrant out for your arrest. And don't hang up, by the way. That's how I know. If you hang up, then we'll have to arrest you. I can't help you. But if you stay on the line, then I can probably get you out of this. But when you just send me X number of dollars. And, oh, by the way, thank you for sending that to me. But as it turns out, it was actually a little bit more. I made a miscalculation, so I need you to send me another X amount of dollars. And they'll just milk them and for as long as they can keep them on the line.
Sometimes it's a loved one who needs to be bailed out of jail. Someone will portray a grandson, and a different person will portray the sheriff's deputy or another authority figure. They'll ask for the money to be sent via gift cards. The victim goes to the store, buys gift cards, and reads the number to the fraudster on the phone. Robinson says the scam calls can be so convincing the victim can't be dissuaded from buying the cards.
It's a scam, but these people have been manipulated in many respects and bought into it. And so it's when you're dealing with someone's emotions and they get the emotional buy-in, and they decide to send this money virtually to this person using their emotions as the guide. It overrides their common sense, and in many cases, it's almost impossible to convince them that they're being scammed.
Robinson says they even put up billboards or signs near gift cards to try to catch someone at the last minute, but it doesn't always work, and there's not much they can do for victims. He says it's a very frustrating place for law enforcement to be.
And, you were to tell me that, hey, I just got, $50,000 stolen from me, then I'm going, oh my gosh, that's a serious felony. We want to try to get your money back. What can I do to help? But it seems like this kind of telephone scam is like this giant dark black void in which, they can operate with almost total impunity, and law enforcement is relatively powerless to do anything about it. It's not a happy place for us to be because we don't have any good news to tell victims when they call us, and they've actually sent the money already.
And WNIN's Tim Jagalow joins us now here in the studio. Thank you, Tim, for joining us, as always.
No problem, John.
All right, well, let's talk about this a little bit. Sheriff Noah Robinson says these kind of scammers can act with impunity. How is that possible?
Well, these calls are done with voice over IP or Google Voice, so there's not even like a real phone account. And so there's no real oversight, there's no accountability, and there's no real way to trace them. And Robinson said that even if you could trace them, it would be some shady business overseas, and even if you found it, it's not like they'll respect a subpoena. Right. And if they did respect the subpoena, are there going to be records that show that they were doing criminal stuff? So, what would they even report? And again, they can act with impunity because they're so convincing to their victims. They're often after the elderly. And people, he said that people are afraid of an arrest warrant on them being made public, even if there isn't really an arrest warrant. So they have something to lose. And, he says, their faculties may not be as sharp as they used to, or their hearing's not as good. Right. So there's a lot of reasons for it to kind of to happen, for it to work.
Yeah. Well, I guess with this new technology, is that one reason that it's becoming more common?
Yeah, I mean the Google, it's the voice over internet. Yeah, that's basically it. There doesn't have to be a real phone or a real phone number.
And so, how common are these scams becoming?
He says it's as common as somebody running a red light. It's so common, that it went from an occasional annoyance to almost normal, like alarmingly normal. Right. And he also, again, alarmingly elaborate. Yeah. The sheriff's office is regularly impersonated, and sometimes they even take it one step further. He said that there are sometimes places or calls where the person who's scamming the other person, the fraudster who's portraying a sheriff's deputy, will say, hey, come to the sheriff's office so you can give us the money in person. Okay, I'm here. I made it. Okay, well, we see you, but we've got COVID restrictions currently, so just read me the numbers. We see you, though. Right. And he said, people are being scammed on our property, and he said that's frustrating, and he said it's also embarrassing for the sheriff's office.
Sure. Well, have you seen some of these scams yourself?
I have not. They've seemed to be very age-directed.
Right.
So the stuff that I see would be, I get like an email invoice from Amazon that says, hey, you've got you spent $347.24. We're going to charge you this amount, but if you didn't, call us. Let us get a hold of us. Or there'll be like a Geek Squad invoice. Yeah, and all they have to do is use like the letterhead or like a print screen from a real invoice, and that's it. There's those kinds of things. I'll get texts that say a USPS, your delivery is not going to make it for problems. Get a hold of us here. Those kinds of things. I mean, what have you seen?
Well, I have seen those very kinds of things as well on my phone. Pretty much my thing is if I see a number and I don't recognize it, I just don't answer it. Let it go to voicemail if necessary, and then take it from there. But I see a lot of those kinds of things. These mysterious, UPS tried to deliver this, and we can't reach you, and you need to do this and do that. Haven't had much in the way of any attempted police imposters or anything. But it has certainly happened to me, certainly, and of course we can point out that I am of that older age group, and perhaps that's why I see them perhaps more than you do. So I guess a big question is, what can people do to protect themselves from such things?
Well, like the sheriff said, once the money's gone, it's basically gone in these situations.
Yeah.
So the only thing you can do is avoid it. He said, first of all, the IRS, the Vanderbilt County Sheriff's Office, the marshals, these people are not going to call and ask you for money over the phone. He said there are situations where there may be, a bond or something like that, but they'll send a letter for that.
Right.
And so, this whole story started because the law enforcement, they posted a law enforcement warning on their Facebook page, the sheriff's office did. And this is a joint message. And, it basically says like, hey, is a sheriff deputy trying to call you for money? A U.S. Marshal, an IRS agent, a, quote, police officer, a jail officer.
Right.
Before wiring or purchasing prepaid cards, look for signs of fraud.
Sure.
And, of course, they're not going to ask you for money over the phone. That's not the way they work. So,
Right.
So there's basically a nice one sheet, as we call them on Facebook.
Right.
But some things that you can do, if you're really convinced that your family's in trouble and they need money, get a hold of them directly.
Sure.
Through your common ways. Find, if it was my sister, for example, she lives out of state.
Right.
So I could be like, Dad, what's going on with Rebecca? Is she okay?
Right,
yeah, she's
right.
fine. She's right here. Then okay, who's trying to scam me?
Sure.
Try to do things like that. And one thing that Robinson noted was that just because the ID looks legit, it doesn't mean it is.
Sure,
that can be fake just as easily. So, again, don't buy the cards for one thing, and also just have your guard up because it just there's no way to get the money back.
Yeah.
You just have to be very aware that this is going on.
Yes, indeed. Some good advice there. I will also note before we wrap it up here, there is a film out right now called Thelma. It's a very entertaining film, and it is in fact a story about an elderly woman who is scammed on the telephone, and she fights back.
Did you see it?
We did see it recently, yes, and enjoyed it quite a bit.
Okay, all right.
Yes, I recommend it highly.
Okay, cool.
So, but again, the sheriff's office would be a little more educational than this film when it comes to this, but it's an entertaining film as well. That is WNIN's Tim Jackalow. Tim, as always, thank you so much for joining us on the Friday Wrap.
No problem, John. Glad to be back.
All right, good to have you here. All right, well, coming up, a special conversation with WNIN's Tim Jackalow as he speaks to NPR's Morning Edition host Renee Montaigne. That'll be coming up in, I'm sorry?
Kenton.
Oh, what did I say?
Sorry, he said me.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah,
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, Tim is moving along now. He'll
Right.
be good. Kenton will be in, however, with that interview with former Morning Edition host Renee Montaigne, who is retiring from NPR. That is straight ahead on the Friday Wrap on WNIN. Hope you can stay with us.
Hey, it's Luke Burbank. This week on Livewire, we are celebrating Black History Month, chatting with poet and author Tracy K. Smith about her latest book. Also, poet Saeed Jones talks about his collection, Alive at the End of the World. And we've got music from McCleat. That's all this week on Livewire from PRX.
Who can say no to a missionary on his deathbed? A local author is fulfilling her promise to Father Jerry Ziliak in a new book, Tiny Teak. I'm David James, and on 2 Main Street, Mary Ellen Ziliak tells the story of her uncle's half-century of service in India, teaching modern farming techniques to the poorest of the poor. 2 Main Street airs Thursday at noon and Saturday at 11, presented by Jeffrey Berger, Kim Wren, and the Berger Wealth Team at Bayard Private Wealth Management.
WNIN's listeners could be your best customers. We all find value in public radio, and research shows that 85% of listeners are more likely to take advantage of a business or service they've heard about on public radio. So if you enjoy listening to WNIN, why not invite your fellow listeners to become your customers? Call 812-423-2973 for more information.
It's the Friday Wrap on WNIN FM. I'm John Gibson. Good to have you along. Well, after a more than 40-year career at NPR, former Morning Edition host Renee Montaigne is retiring. Montaigne was the first guest at the WNIN Gala more than 20 years ago, and she returned as the guest in 2020. WNIN's Kenton McDonald spoke with Montaigne this week about her career and what's next.
So I was reading the article that NPR released this week about your departure, and one of the great things about it was the photos I think that they included about your career. I'm curious how often you reflect on where you've been in the world and everything you've seen.
Not that often. In fact, up until this last few weeks, it was quite rare that I look back. The photos, most of them NPR had, but I provided a couple, and I found myself looking through boxes. That's where I keep my photos from the real old days, but, scanning all my photos. And I did start reflecting on, whoa, this was I didn't quite realize how many places I'd been and at different points in news, but also in history. And it felt quite good doing that, the look back.
So you've been in the business for a few decades, going back to the early 80s. And I wonder if you've ever thought about what advice you would give to yourself in 1981 and what you would tell aspiring journalists today.
I can start with one thing. An aspiring journalist today is in a different world period than we were then, and certainly a different world as regards NPR. When I came in 1981, I came in as a freelancer, and I freelanced for years because they basically did not have jobs. Well, certainly not in New York, and that's where I was. But NPR took them a while to. It was in the 80s when they started creating actual jobs for reporters all around the U.S. and then eventually internationally. But so there was you might say an easier path. I mean, I'm not kidding. I was asked to do some stories for NPR by a friend of mine I'd made who had been brought in from Howard University Station. She'd been brought over to run what was called the acquisitions desk. And she called me right away and said, you should do some work for NPR. And I was coming out from San Francisco at that point. And I did. And I did one story, and it turned into 3 stories. And then it turned into, I was there all the time. And within a couple of months, they gave me a desk, a phone, and the key to the bureau in New York. And by the way, acquisitions unit turned into the national desk. So, to even imagine someone walking in on that situation, I think the substitute for that actually, which is amazing, is in the interns. I mean, so many of our people from RE, people were interns to begin with. So that my only advice, I guess I would say, is be excited about what you're doing. Be willing to sacrifice a bit. Don't spend any time worrying about, your retirement fund. I mean, just dig in and go for it. And as much as you can maneuver your way into things you especially like, that's up to you. But also, that's a quality one should have.
You kind of touched on this at the beginning of your answer, but does it feel like we're entering some sort of an unprecedented era of news and journalism, especially in the last, 4 years or even more recent than that?
We've definitely entered into a very different version of the news and how people get it. All I can say is when you hear something like this many people, young people mainly, but this percentage get their news from TikTok, I mean, that's a news story. Obviously, now we discover these statistics I would have never expected. There's another world here. And we all know about, paper and about even NPR. It's tricky if people aren't in their cars as much. People used to listen in the car. I sure did, even with all the many years I worked for it. My big listen was going and coming from up until Morning Edition. But even then, I was listening to the BBC at 11 o'clock at night. I mean, I was listening to NPR for my 30 minutes or 40 minutes. And we all know that's changed. That from COVID, but every other possible. I mean, there's so many other inputs of the new way things are done. So yes, we have, but I think one would want to remember that there have been other, maybe more, not so fast, but other ways in which everything changed. I mean, when radio came along, and then when TV came along, and then when suddenly the TV's, anchors didn't mean as much. They weren't the gods of journalism, and NPR's, just to say, NPR rose in this great last 40 years from not much to something really important. Now, I don't mean not much. It was wonderful. I mean, to being a well-kept, a well-kept secret. When I hosted All Things Considered, there were 3 million listeners.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, we consider it a problem if there's less than, 2-digit million listeners for the shows, the big shows. So, the change is here.
Yeah.
And everybody's trying to figure out, including NPR, how to make it work within our values and our mission and within our talents and simply what we like to do and think is a good thing to do.
Yeah. Hey, I want to ask you one more thing here. When you were in Evansville a few years ago, I think you were asked a couple of times about the wild hours you had to keep hosting Morning Edition from the West Coast. Can you just tell me what that was like and what your schedule was like back then and how I think probably happy you are to have to no longer have that schedule?
It feels like yesterday, by the way. It took me a couple of years to get over it. I am quite serious about that, to feel not quite jet lagged much of the time. But okay, my schedule was, first I would get in there at 11 p.m. and then a couple of years into it, I eased off, and by the end it was midnight. I would go to bed at about 3 if I wanted to get 8 hours, but do we ever do that anyway? So, I'd go to bed in the daylight for the most of the year and pull down the shades, and I was in California. So it would always be a bit of what a nice day. Punk.
Yeah, right.
Get rid of it. But yeah, I would get in there at midnight, which is pretty dramatic. And in California, I didn't have a whole pile of people running around. It was just myself, an editor, an engineer, and that was it. And the guard. And I've many, many pictures of us celebrating, when it was just Steve and me. And that was the first about decade.
Mm-hmm.
We always, one of us was on the air. This is the truth. There was one time, and it had to do with Hurricane Katrina, where I was down in New Orleans, and he got laryngitis. So I remember we brought in Linda Wertheimer that time. We would have subs, but we would always be there. One of us would always be there, which we felt a big commitment to. The notion that you wake up and you're going to hear us. You can know who you're going to hear, and you're going to hear us. And so we had to share the holidays, because one of us had to go Christmas, one New Year's, whatever. And that went on for years. And so, listen, I loved it. I loved doing the show so much. I grew to, how can you say, value it being 2 a.m. because there's a calmness, a strange calmness about 4 hours where nobody's awake in your neighborhood.
Yeah.
So they were tough hours, though. They were really tough. I mean, I might have stayed on longer, but there was a moment in time around going into the 13th year where it wasn't it actually wasn't healthy probably, but I just thought time to get up and do other things. And then I went on to an investigative project. So nobody could have asked for any better way of leaving that show to be doing an investigative story. This was The Lost Mothers, we called it, about women dying in childbirth. I flipped into an entirely different situation. So it was wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love the show. I'm very close with Steve still.
Good.
If anybody cares.
From Carmel, Indiana, from Indiana himself. Before we wrap up here, just curious, what's next, Renee, as you leave public broadcasting?
Well, you tell me. I'm not retiring from. I'm technically retiring, obviously, leaving NPR, but I'm not. Maybe I'll be connected to NPR forever. 90% of my friends came from here, but also not leaving journalism. I to be real clear, I kind of figured out that I couldn't figure out the next me until I left NPR. So, I was within this organization, I'm a certain thing and have my talent, I know, audio, journalism, and to try and maybe stretch out a little bit and find some other challenge. I just thought, let's just wrap it up, and I'll always be connected, and then I'll go on, and give myself a break, thinking about who I am as a journalist.
Sure.
And so that's what's next is a big think about that.
Yeah, that sounds great. And if you're looking to work at a local member station, we'd love to have you here in Evansville.
Oh, Oh, it's such a sweetheart to say that. And thank you to all your wonderful listeners, because I know they're out there, and I met a bunch of them, and I tell you, it's a pleasure to be all connected the way we all are.
Absolutely. Renee Montaigne, thanks for making the time to talk with us today, and all the best to you in the future.
All right. Thank you. You as well.
Thanks.
That was WNIN's Kenton McDonald speaking with Renee Montaigne. She's retiring after more than 40 years as a reporter and host at NPR. This is the Friday Wrap. Coming up next will be the Sports Chat with Jevin Redmond. Hope you can stay with us.
Our statewide news team wants to hear from you. Stay in touch by joining the Indiana Two-Way. You'll receive a text to your phone every Thursday morning with questions related to statewide topics and news updates to keep you informed. Your responses will guide our future reporting and make sure we are covering the stories that matter to you. To join, go to ipbs.org/text.
On the next Radio Lab...
I'm not saying that this is a good idea.
What if you replaced yourself with an AI replica?
I wanted to know, if I could do it.
You cloned your voice...
Hello, it's Evan.
...and unleashed it into the world.
Hey there.
Hey, Evan, how's it going?
Great to hear you.
It came pretty close to buying health insurance.
This is mildly terrifying.
Does it feel like you're talking to your dad?
Kinda.
Can you send a digital twin to work while you hit the beach?
That's on the next Radio Lab.
Who can say no to a missionary on his deathbed? A local author is fulfilling her promise to Father Jerry Ziliak in a new book, Tiny Teak. I'm David James, and on 2 Main Street, Mary Ellen Ziliak tells the story of her uncle's half-century of service in India, teaching modern farming techniques to the poorest of the poor. 2 Main Street airs Thursday at noon and Saturday at 11, presented by Jeffrey Berger, Kim Wren, and the Berger Wealth Team at Bayard Private Wealth Management.
It's the Friday Wrap on WNIN FM. I'm John Gibson, and joining me now is Jevin Redmond for this week's Sports Chat. Jevin, good to have you along, as always.
Yeah, thanks, John.
All right. Well, lots of stuff happening, as usual. Let's talk about girls' high school basketball in the area. It's tournament time, right?
It is. So the postseason begins on Tuesday with the sectionals that'll run Tuesday through Saturday. And just an update from the regular season, local teams that won their respective conference. Central here in Evansville won the SIAC. They went 9-0. They're 19-4 overall. It was very competitive. Castle, Wrights, and North all had good seasons, going 7-2 in conference play. And then just outside of the city, Washington has a very good team. They won the Pocket Athletic Conference, going 12-0, and they're 21-2 on the season.
Wow, that's some great records. Of course, boys' high school basketball continues as well.
Yeah, we still have a month left until we talk about their postseason getting underway, but a couple of big games tonight in the city. The biggest one is Wrights playing at Central. Wrights is 11-2. Central is 13-2. Also, Memorial and Harrison having good seasons. Memorial 11-2 plays at Princeton, and Harrison, who's 10-4, travels to Vincennes. Those are the 3 biggest games involving city teams tonight.
Yes, indeed. Well, let's move up to the college ranks. I believe we've got some information on both men's and women's college basketball, right?
Yeah, we'll start at the University of Evansville. The Purple Aces men's team has won back-to-back games. They went to Valparaiso on Saturday and won by 10. Then beat Murray State here at Ford Center on Wednesday, 78-74. For the Aces, it was their first win against Murray State since December of 2019. After a very bumpy non-conference part of the schedule, they're now 5-6 in conference play. They're in a 4-way tie for 6th, and they'll be at Belmont on Sunday playing at 2 o'clock. Over on the west side of town at U.S. side, their men's basketball team is home tomorrow against Tennessee Tech, and they have a lot to play for this final month. They're trying to make the OVC tournament, which will be at Ford Center first week of March. Right. John, they take the top 8 teams, and right now USI is in 9th place. They're a game out of making the postseason. So they're 4-7 in conference play, and a big stretch coming up. They have 3 games in a row at home.
Lots of stuff happening there. We would be remiss, I think, if we didn't talk about this men's basketball game happening tonight. That's in West Lafayette, where IU will be playing Purdue. And that's always quite the battle there with the two big Indiana schools.
It is tough matchup for IU as Purdue is ranked 12th, and IU's kind of had an up and down season, so
Right.
a chance to get a big win, maybe get their season back on track. And if they want to get back in the conversation of being an at-large team come NCAA tournament time, this is one of those games they have to win, and they have to win many big games this final month.
Sure, and I'm sure Purdue would love to, as always, beat IU
Absolutely,
and keep them at bay, keep them out of the tournament if possible. One other note I'll make here: hockey tonight. The Evansville Thunderbolts host Macon. The puck drops at 7 p.m. at the Ford Center. Jevin, anything else to add?
Yeah, before we go, it's starting to warm up some outside, so baseball is right around the corner. It's kind of wild to think.
Hard to
College
believe.
sports-wise, softball begins next weekend for college athletes. Baseball in 2 weekends, and John, I know you're a big White Sox fan. I'm a big Cardinal fan. But spring training begins. Pitchers and catchers report here in about 2 weeks.
Yeah, just a couple of weeks to go before spring training gets underway. That is Jevin Redmond. That is the Sports Chat. As always, Jevin, thank you very much.
Yep, thanks, John.
And coming up on the Friday wrap, we'll be chatting with Caitlin Bentley, and we'll bring you the Weekend Notebook. Don't go anywhere.
Hey, it's Luke Burbank. This week on Livewire, we are celebrating Black History Month, chatting with poet and author Tracy K. Smith about her latest book. Also, poet Saeed Jones talks about his collection, Alive at the End of the World. And we've got music from McCleat. That's all this week on Livewire from PRX.
WNIN's listeners could be your best customers. We all find value in public radio, and research shows that 85% of listeners are more likely to take advantage of a business or service they've heard about on public radio. So if you enjoy listening to WNIN, why not invite your fellow listeners to become your customers? Call 812-423-2973 for more information.
African-American jazz guitar elder George Benson started with guitar organ trios and has a signature sound for the ages. Young clarinetist sax virtuoso Aurora Nealon plays trad and modern jazz and more, crediting Stravinsky, New Orleans Sidney Bechet, and hippie parents for inspiration. It's eclectic excellence on American roots from PRX.
Who can say no to a missionary on his deathbed? A local author is fulfilling her promise to Father Jerry Ziliak in a new book, Tiny Teak. I'm David James, and on 2 Main Street, Mary Ellen Ziliak tells the story of her uncle's half-century of service in India, teaching modern farming techniques to the poorest of the poor. 2 Main Street airs Thursday at noon and Saturday at 11, presented by Jeffrey Berger, Kim Wren, and the Berger Wealth Team at Bayard Private Wealth Management.
It's the Friday wrap on WNIN FM. Good to have you along on this Friday. And joining me now from the Arts Council for Southwest Indiana, our special guest, Ms. Bentley. Good to see you as always.
It's great to see you. Thank you for having me.
All right. Good to have you along, Caitlin. Well, we've got quite a few things happening this weekend. I'll start with tonight. Up to Jasper we go. We have a group called Yesterday and Today. It's a Beatles tribute, and it's happening at the Jasper Arts Center at 7:30 Eastern Time. That's 6:30 Evansville time, in case you don't want to have that confusion with the time zones there. Again, that's Yesterday and Today, a Beatles tribute happening at the Jasper Arts Center, 7:30 Eastern Time tonight. Also happening tonight here in Evansville, it's the Shakespeare Players, and they're presenting Romeo and Juliet. The Bard's most famous play will be performed at Stage 2 at 321 North Congress Avenue. Showtimes are 7:30 tonight and tomorrow night, and at 2 p.m. Sunday afternoon. Admission is $18, and a cash bar is available as well. Again, that's the Evansville Shakespeare Players at Stage 2, 321 North Congress Avenue. And Caitlin, I understand you've got an event also happening tonight at a place called Fidel's, right?
Yes, if you like bourbon and lo-fi beats, you might want to stop by Fidel's Bourbon Bar for an electronic set called Rhythm of the Night by DJ Tuggs. That is between 8 p.m. and midnight tonight, and it's free.
And Fidel's can you give us a location on that? That's down by Haney's Corner, right?
Yes, that is above Walton's. It's kind of a speakeasy vibe.
I see. Very good. All right, that's happening tonight. Let's move on to Saturday, and I'll start with a guided interpretive nature hike at Angel Mounds. The first hike is at 10:30 Saturday morning at the State Historic Site off Pollock Avenue. Admission to the Interpretive Center also covers the nature hike. Again, those hikes begin at 10:30 tomorrow at Angel Mounds off Pollock Avenue. And Caitlin, I understand you have an event happening at EVPL Oakland. You're going to be celebrating the new Lunar New Year, right?
Yes, all day between 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. There's going to be games, a scavenger hunt, and more for pre-K and elementary age students to celebrate the Chinese and Lunar New Year. Again, that is tomorrow at EVPL Oakland.
And as I understand it, this is the year of the snake.
Yes, and
indeed.
that is me, actually.
Is that right? I see. Okay. No comment. I'm not a big snake fan. I will say that.
Yes.
But the year of the snake. Hey, that's fine with me. Just keep the snakes away. That's all I ask. Also happening tomorrow. You mentioned that event at EVPL Oakland. We also have an event at EVPL North Park. It's a quilt show and tell. You're invited to bring one or two of your favorite quilts to share why they're special to you. Hand-sewn or machine-sewn quilts are welcome. You can share a memory and make a memory at the Quilt Show and Tell at the North Park Library on Kaler Drive by Central High School. That's happening from 1 until 2 p.m. until 2 p.m. tomorrow. Also happening tomorrow night here in downtown Evansville, Cody Johnson performs at the Ford Center. The country music star brings his Leather Deluxe Tour to Evansville with special guests Ashley McBride and Drew Baldridge. The concert is reportedly sold out, so you may need to try to find a third-party ticket service if you're still trying to go. That show begins at 7:30 p.m. Saturday at the Ford Center. I also understand we've got an event tomorrow night at Boca Lounge, right, Caitlin?
Yes, so if you're not able to get those last-minute tickets to Cody Johnson, you might want to stop by Boca for the Backbeats, which is another Beatles tribute. These guys are making a big comeback in a big way,
Yes,
so
indeed.
get your yeah-yeahs ready for a fab night.
There you go. That's the again the back beats, correct? That's the name of the band. Right?
Yes, it's a free event at 8 p.m.
All right, at Boca Lounge. So a couple of opportunities to see some Beatles tributes this weekend. All right, well, let's see. Moving on to Sunday now. We have the Evansville Philharmonic presenting It's Magic. The show will feature singer Joan Ellison as she swings in high fidelity with conductor Roger Callia and the orchestra. The performance of mid-20th century hits made from greats like Judy Garland, Lena Horne, and Ella Fitzgerald. That performance starts at 2 p.m. Sunday at the Victory Theater. Again, that's the Evansville Philharmonic presenting It's Magic, and singer Joan Ellison will be performing. Another event happening in downtown Evansville, and that's the Haney's Corner Arts District's Chili Cook-Off. Teams will be preparing their chili throughout the day on the wiffle ball field at 2nd Street and Adams. The chili will be served at 4:30. The cost to enjoy the competition chili is $10, and proceeds will benefit Haney's Corner. And I meant to pass one of those along to you, Caitlin, so I'm sorry. Anything else to add? Anything shaken at the Arts Council?
Anything at the Arts Council? Well, we have our food-themed art exhibit up right now. We are open until 4 p.m. today, and we'll open back up Tuesday of next week. But we have several events going on within the next month for our Month for the Arts initiative. So make sure to check our social media at ArtsWin. Everything is posted on there, so stay up to date with us. We'd love to see you in the gallery.
Yes, indeed. That's Caitlin Bentley from the Arts Council of Southwestern Indiana. As always, thank you so much for helping us on the Weekend Notebook, Caitlin. We'd also like to thank all of our guests today, including Sarah Lesh of the Evansville Courier and Press. Thanks to WNIN's Tim Jagalow. Thanks also to WNIN's Kenton McDonald. A big thank you to retiring NPR anchor Renee Montaigne. Thanks to Jevin Redmond for both the sports chat and for engineering today's program. And another thanks to the Arts Council's Caitlin Bentley. Well, we certainly appreciate your listening and your support here at WNIN. We'd also like to thank the WNIN TV staff for social media support, also Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations, and of course, your support makes it all possible. This is 88.3 WNIN FM, Evansville, Henderson, and Owensboro. With your support, we're building a better tri-state together. I'm John Gibson. Have a fine, fine weekend. And for this Friday, that's a wrap.